a $1 trillion company, a platform used by more than 3 billion people every single day, and an algorithm powerful enough to shape what we see, think, and believe. Facebook, or as it's now known, Meta, isn't just a social media platform. It's the most influential information empire of the modern age. But behind its sleek, blue interface lies a moral crisis that changed the world, a story of greed, data manipulation, political influence, and psychological addiction, a story about how one company gained the power to reshape society, and what happened when that power grew out of control. Today, we uncover the dark truth behind Meta's rise, how a vision built on connection evolved into one of the most ethically complex corporations in history. This is the story of Facebook's moral collapse, and perhaps the most dangerous turning point of the digital age. The connection revolution, Facebook's rise, and the birth of power in the early 2000s. The internet was a fragmented landscape, a collection of chat rooms, message boards, and isolated websites competing for attention. Connection existed, but it was scattered and chaotic. People were online, yet strangely alone. The world was waiting for a platform that could bridge that gap, something that could bring order to the digital chaos, and make human connection feel immediate, effortless, and global. In 2004, in a small dorm room at Harvard University, that idea began to take shape. Mark Zuckerberg, along with a handful of college roommates, launched a website that would change not only the internet, but the very fabric of human interaction. It was called the Facebook. At first, it was just another student project, one of many small social networks trying to connect college campuses. But within weeks, something unusual happened. Users were spending hours on it. They weren't just browsing profiles. They were living through the screen. The site became a mirror of identity, reputation, and belonging. It tapped into something primal, the need to be seen, to be known, and to belong to something larger than oneself. By 2005, the Facebook dropped the V and expanded beyond Harvard to universities across the United States. The growth was explosive. What began as an exclusive campus tool quickly became a nationwide obsession. Students described it as addictive, but they couldn't explain why. There was no flashy design, no advanced features, just a clean blue interface that made every like, every post, and every notification feel personal. The dopamine-driven feedback loop was already in motion, though no one fully understood it yet. As venture capital poured in, Zuckerberg's ambitions grew. He wasn't interested in building just another social network. He wanted to create a social infrastructure, a new kind of internet built around identity. Every user was a real person, tied to a verified name and network. This decision to anchor the platform in real identity would become both its greatest strength and its deepest flaw. Because when you tie identity to visibility, you also tie it to validation, and validation, at scale, becomes a form of currency. By 2008, Facebook had surpassed MySpace, once the undisputed king of social media. Unlike MySpace, which celebrated chaos and personalization, Facebook promised order and uniformity. Every profile looked the same, every connection followed the same logic. This simplicity created trust. It made people feel safe. Behind that feeling, however, was a sophisticated design philosophy, one that measured engagement down to the millisecond, learning how users responded to even the smallest changes. Each tweak was an experiment in human psychology. Zuckerberg famously declared that Facebook's mission was to make the world more open and connected. It was a statement that sounded noble, almost utopian. But openness, as it turned out, was a double-edged sword. The more people shared, the more data Facebook collected. And the more data it collected, the more powerful its algorithms became. Connection was no longer just a social good. It was a resource, one that could be quantified, analyzed, and monetized. The turning point came with the introduction of the news feed in 2006. For the first time, users didn't have to visit each other's profiles to see updates. The platform would curate what they saw. This was a revolutionary shift. Facebook had moved from being a passive tool to an active storyteller. It was now deciding, on a massive scale, what millions of people would see and when they would see it. The newsfeed was the first real test of Facebook's influence, and it revealed something Zuckerberg and his team hadn't fully anticipated. Emotion spreads faster than information. Posts that evoked strong reactions, anger, joy, outrage, performed better. They kept users engaged longer. And in the world of social media, engagement meant growth. Facebook's engineers didn't need to manipulate emotions directly. The system did it on its own. The algorithm learned that outrage was good for business. Every click, every like, every argument became a tiny data point in a vast psychological experiment. By the early 2010s, Facebook was no longer just a company. It was an ecosystem. It connected friends, families, brands, governments, and movements. Revolutions were organized on it. Relationships began and ended through it. Birthdays, protests, elections, all of them now had a digital trace. The platform had woven itself into the rhythm of daily life, so completely that being off Facebook started to feel like social isolation. In just a few years, it had transformed from a dorm room idea into a global infrastructure of communication. The company's internal culture mirrored its product: bold, ambitious, and indifferent to limits. Zuckerberg's mantra, "Move fast and break things," captured the spirit of Silicon Valley innovation without hesitation. To investors, it meant progress. To critics, it meant recklessness. But for Facebook's engineers, it was a directive. Every new feature, every update, was deployed rapidly, tested live on billions of users. There was no time for ethical debates. The goal was growth. When Facebook went public in 2012, its valuation crossed $100 billion, one of the largest IPOs in history. Zuckerberg, wearing his signature hoodie, stood on the Nasdaq stage as a symbol of the new tech elite, young, fearless, and incredibly powerful. But behind the triumph was a subtle shift. The company that once prioritized connection now had a new obligation: profit. Advertisers became Facebook's true customers, and users the product. This was the birth of the surveillance economy. Facebook's advertising model relied on precision targeting, fueled by the vast amounts of personal data it collected. Age, location, interests, habits, fears, every click became part of a detailed psychological profile. Advertisers didn't just buy ad space anymore. They bought human attention, optimized and sold in microseconds. As the company grew, its influence expanded far beyond what anyone could have predicted. Governments began using Facebook data to target voters. Corporations used it to manipulate consumer behavior. And users, largely unaware of the extent of their exposure, continued to share willingly, feeding the machine that was studying them. The world had entered a new era, one where technology could not only observe human behavior, but also shape it. By the mid-2010s, Facebook's dominance was unquestioned. It had acquired Instagram and WhatsApp, consolidating control over billions of users across multiple platforms. Zuckerberg's vision of connection had been realized, but the cost was becoming clear. The same tools that made it easy to share also made it easy to deceive. Misinformation spread as fast as truth, sometimes faster. Fake accounts, bots, and propaganda networks found fertile ground in Facebook's algorithmic ecosystem. The platform that promised openness was now accused of manipulation. The tool built to connect people was being blamed for dividing them. And the question that began to surface, quietly at first and then loudly across the world, was this: had Facebook connected humanity or corrupted it? The seeds of that moral crisis had been planted years earlier, in the relentless pursuit of engagement and growth. But it would take a series of global scandals to reveal just how deep those roots ran. And as the world began to understand the scale of Facebook's power, even its own employees would start to question whether the company they built had gone too far. The connection revolution was complete, and now, the reckoning was about to begin. The algorithm and the addiction. How Facebook engineered human behavior. When Facebook introduced the newsfeed in 2006, it seemed like a simple feature, a convenient way to see what your friends were up to without visiting each profile. But beneath that simplicity was a powerful shift. The newsfeed was not a mirror of reality. It was a curated window. Every post, every reaction, every piece of content was chosen by an algorithm designed to maximize engagement. In the beginning, this system was basic. It prioritized what was popular, what people liked, what they commented on. But over time, it became more sophisticated, learning what made people stop scrolling, what made them click, and what kept them coming back. At its core, Facebook was building something revolutionary, a self-learning machine that studied human attention at scale. It analyzed patterns of behavior in real time, adjusting its recommendations based on millions of micro-decisions made every second. The more data it collected, the smarter it became. And the smarter it became, the more irresistible it felt. For users, it was magic. The feed always seemed to know what they wanted to see. For Facebook, it was the ultimate discovery. Attention could be predicted, manipulated, and most neat. But the engineers didn't call it addiction. They called it engagement. But engagement had measurable effects on the brain. Every like, comment, and notification triggered a small release of dopamine, the same chemical that reinforces habits, pleasures, and compulsions. It wasn't just social interaction anymore. It was behavioral conditioning. Users were being trained to crave the feedback loop, to check their phones, not because they wanted to, but because they couldn't help it. Facebook wasn't merely connecting people. It was programming them. By 2010, this system had evolved into one of the most advanced behavioral algorithms in existence. It didn't just respond to what users did, it anticipated what they would do next. If you lingered on a photo for a second longer than usual, it noticed. If you reacted to a controversial post, it learned. Every scroll, pause, and click became a data point in your psychological profile. And because the platform was built on identity, that profile was real. It wasn't a guess. It was you, your habits, your fears, your desires, mapped in detail by a machine that understood you better than you understood yourself. This was the beginning of algorithmic intimacy. Facebook didn't need to read your mind. It could predict your mood. If you were feeling lonely, it would show you more posts from friends. If you were angry, it might surface political content to keep you engaged. Every emotion became an opportunity. The system didn't have intentions in the human sense, but its logic was clear. Whatever kept people online longer was good for business. And outrage, division, and controversy kept people online longer than happiness ever could. The algorithm didn't invent these emotions, it amplified them. It learned that when users argued, they stayed. When they saw something shocking, they shared. And when they shared, the network grew. Each change in the code created ripples across the platform, shaping conversations, relationships, and even world events. It wasn't manipulation by design, it was manipulation by outcome. A feedback loop with no moral compass, only metrics. Inside Facebook, the culture was still guided by the same mantra: move fast and break things. But now, what they were breaking wasn't just code, it was human behavior. Designers introduced new features like the like button, thinking it would spread positivity. Instead, it rewired social validation. People began to measure their worth in numbers, likes, followers, reactions. The invisible hand of the algorithm began to dictate what people posted and how they presented themselves. Over time, authenticity gave way to performance. The platform rewarded emotion over truth, speed over reflection. Behind the scenes, teams of data scientists were experimenting constantly. They A/B tested colors, button shapes, and notification frequencies. They tested how often to send alerts, how to time push notifications, even what sounds triggered the strongest response. Each experiment revealed something new about human psychology. The conclusion was always the same. More engagement meant more time on the platform, and more time meant more profit. The system was a casino in disguise, and the users were the players, pulling the lever for another dopamine hit. In 2012, when Facebook went public, the algorithm became its most valuable asset. Investors didn't buy shares in a website, they bought shares in human attention. Facebook's leadership understood this better than anyone. They invested heavily in artificial intelligence to optimize the newsfeed. Machine learning models began analyzing not only behavior but also context, the type of device you used, the time of day you logged in, your location, your friends' activities. It wasn't about serving you the best content. It was about serving the most engaging content, the one most likely to make you stay. This constant optimization led to what psychologists would later call the attention trap. People began to spend hours scrolling without remembering why they opened the app in the first place. Time lost meaning. The feed had no end, no natural stopping point. Infinite scroll turned attention into inertia. You didn't decide to keep watching, you just didn't decide to stop. Facebook had transformed a simple human behavior, curiosity, into an engineered addiction, and yet, the brilliance of the system was its invisibility. Users didn't feel manipulated. They felt entertained, informed, connected. They believed they were in control, choosing what to see, what to like, what to share. But in reality, those choices were being quietly guided. The algorithm wasn't just showing you the world, it was building a version of the world around you, one that confirmed your beliefs, reinforced your biases, and shaped your reality. Each person's feed became a personalized universe, slightly different from everyone else's. Truth fragmented into millions of algorithmic realities. This personalization had a profound consequence. As the platform grew, people stopped sharing a common narrative. News, politics, and culture became filtered through invisible algorithms designed for engagement, not truth. Echo chambers formed, outrage deepened, the world felt more connected than ever, yet more divided than before. And while governments debated privacy and ethics, Facebook's system continued to evolve in silence, learning faster than any regulator could react. By 2015, Facebook's engineers began noticing something unsettling. Users were spending more time on the platform than ever, but they weren't happier. Studies showed that heavy Facebook use was correlated with anxiety, loneliness, and depression. Internally, some employees raised concerns about the addictive design patterns, the emotional toll, and the manipulation of attention. But those concerns rarely made it past the product meetings. Growth metrics overshadowed moral questions. The company had built an empire on engagement, and questioning the algorithm meant questioning its foundation. Even so, cracks were beginning to show. Former employees would later describe the atmosphere inside Facebook as a constant tension between ethics and innovation. Some engineers started to realize that they weren't just building technology, they were shaping human destiny. But in a company driven by competition, hesitation felt like weakness. So the machine kept running, optimizing, learning, adapting. Every new feature made it smarter. Every new user made it stronger. The algorithm's reach extended far beyond the platform itself. It influenced journalism, advertising, and even elections. Media outlets learned that outrage and sensationalism drove clicks, so they adapted to survive. Politicians discovered that emotional polarization could mobilize voters, so they weaponized it. The algorithm wasn't biased toward any ideology, it was biased toward intensity. It rewarded whatever provoked the strongest reaction, and that meant fear, anger, and division spread faster than reason, nuance, or truth. By the time Facebook realized the scale of what it had built, the world was already living inside it. The line between reality and the feed had blurred. People trusted algorithmic validation more than human judgment. The system had become a kind of digital ecosystem, one that fed on attention, amplified emotion, and evolved without oversight. In trying to connect the world, Facebook had created a mirror too powerful to control. It didn't just reflect humanity, it magnified its extremes. And through it all, the company maintained its narrative of progress. It spoke of innovation, connection, and community. But inside the code, the truth was simpler and darker. Facebook had discovered that the most profitable thing it could sell wasn't advertising. It was human behavior itself. Every decision, every impulse, every emotional reaction was part of a vast behavioral marketplace, invisible, automated, and endlessly profitable. The age of connection had become the age of control, and the world had no idea how deep the algorithm's influence really went. The data empire, how information became powered by the digital world had entered a new era. What began as a collection of social platforms had transformed into a network of vast information economies. Every message sent, every image shared, every reaction recorded became part of an invisible currency, data. It was the raw material of the modern internet, mined not from the earth but from human behavior itself. At first, this exchange seemed harmless. Users offered fragments of personal detail in return for convenience, likes, memories, connections, a sense of belonging. But behind the screens, those fragments formed intricate mosaics of identity. Age, emotion, interest, and intention could all be inferred from patterns of activity. The more people shared, the clearer those mosaics became. Corporations realized they were no longer simply building communication tools, they were building behavioral maps of humanity. Each profile represented not just a person but a predictable sequence of choices. Algorithms learned to read those sequences, linking them to purchasing habits, political preferences, and psychological traits. The result was a new kind of power, subtle, scalable, and profitable. Data brokers and advertising networks refined the process. Machine learning systems could now analyze billions of interactions in seconds, identifying correlations invisible to the human eye. If a user paused on a travel photo, searched for flights, and liked a friend's vacation post, The system could anticipate intent long before the person booked a ticket. Prediction became the product. The future of attention could be sold in advance. Governments watched with interest. Marketers celebrated efficiency. Ordinary people rarely noticed. The mechanisms of collection were silent, woven into design. Cookies, permissions, GPS tracking, facial recognition. Each feature introduced for convenience doubled as a sensor. Every click confirmed the model's accuracy. Every login refined its portrait of the user. The architecture of privacy, once a default condition of life, began to erode. In its place rose transparency by compulsion, the constant exposure of daily existence to unseen observers. Data centers grew across continents, storing petabytes of human history, conversations, memories, preferences, searchable, sortable, and, in some cases, the digital self became both a reflection and a resource. The implications reached far beyond advertising. In healthcare, financial systems, and even law enforcement, predictive analytics promised efficiency and foresight. Yet each promise carried a question: who controls the knowledge extracted from our lives, and to what end? The line between personalization and manipulation blurred. When a system knows what you will want tomorrow, free choice becomes a more complex idea. As social platforms integrated with every corner of online life, they ceased to be separate spaces and became the foundation of digital existence itself. Messaging, commerce, entertainment, and news all converged in a handful of ecosystems optimized for engagement. Within those systems, information could circulate at extraordinary speed, but also with unprecedented opacity. Few could trace how or why certain stories rose to prominence, while others vanished into obscurity. For years, users believed they were simply participating in a global conversation. In reality, they were also generating the data that structured that conversation. Every movement within the feed, every post promoted, every ad displayed, was part of a feedback cycle, powered by the collective behavior of billions. The network was teaching itself how to hold attention, and humanity was its teacher. By the late 2010s, the data empire had become set. Artificial intelligence systems no longer relied on manual instruction. They learned directly from interaction. With each iteration, they became better at predicting engagement, refining the emotional tone of content, and maximizing response. The process was invisible, continuous, and largely unregulated. Public awareness eventually caught up. Debates over privacy, consent, and digital sovereignty entered the mainstream. Some nations introduced new protections. Others sought to harness the same tools for surveillance or influence. The world had discovered that information was not only power, it was also vulnerability. Whoever mastered the flow of data could shape economies, politics, and culture itself. And so the great paradox of the information age emerged, a technology built to connect. Individuals had created infrastructures capable of observing entire societies. What began as a tool of expression evolved into a system of prediction. Humanity had built a mirror so precise that it could foresee behavior, yet so vast that no one could look away. The data empire was complete. It did not conquer by force, but by participation. Every tap, every post, every glance at a glowing screen was a quiet act of surrender, a contribution to the largest collective experiment in human history. That the scandals and the backlash. When the world fought back by the end of the 2010s, a quiet unease had settled over the digital world. What once felt like liberation, the freedom to connect, to share, to speak without barriers, was beginning to feel like exposure. People started asking the questions that had long remained unspoken. Who truly controls the information we see, and who benefits from the systems that capture our attention? The first signs of rebellion came from within. Engineers, designers, and former insiders began to describe what life was like inside the data factories of the modern internet. They spoke of algorithms optimized for reaction rather than reflection, of metrics that rewarded outrage over truth. Their testimonies broke the illusion of neutrality that had surrounded the platforms. The public began to realize that the feed was not a window, it was a lens, polished by unseen hands. Governments soon joined the conversation. Across continents, policymakers debated the boundaries of privacy, free expression, and corporate responsibility. New regulations emerged, demanding transparency in data collection and consent. For the first time, citizens were promised the right to understand and control the information gathered about them. It was a small step, but it marked the beginning of accountability in a realm that had once felt untouchable. Meanwhile, a cultural shift was underway. Documentaries, investigative reports, and academic studies began dissecting the effects of social media on democracy, mental health, and childhood development. The same public that had once celebrated the age of connection was now reckoning with its consequences. Words like filter bubble and echo chamber entered the global vocabulary. People began to recognize the invisible architectures shaping their opinions. The backlash wasn't uniform. It took many forms. Some users deleted their accounts entirely, seeking digital silence after years of noise. Others turned to alternative platforms, hoping to reclaim a sense of authenticity. Activists organized online movements demanding algorithmic transparency. Whistleblowers revealed internal documents that exposed the tension between profit and public well-being. What had once been dismissed as conspiracy was now confirmed as complexity, a web of incentives too intricate to untangle easily. Technology companies responded with promises of reform. They introduced new privacy controls, tools for time management, and public commitments to ethical design. Some of these changes were genuine attempts to rebuild trust. Others were strategic gestures aimed at preserving it. Either way, the conversation had shifted. The age of blind optimism about technology had ended. A new age of digital realism had begun. The consequences rippled outward. In parliaments and courtrooms, leaders debated the meaning of free speech in algorithmic spaces. Should platforms be treated like publishers, responsible for the content they amplify, or were they merely mirrors reflecting the societies that built them? There were no easy answers. Every regulation risked unintended outcomes. Every safeguard carried the possibility of censorship. The digital world was proving far more complex than the laws written to govern it. In classrooms and homes, parents and teachers began rethinking the role of screens in daily life. Mental health experts warned of the psychological cost of constant connectivity, the erosion of attention, the comparison trap, the loneliness hidden behind curated perfection. The same devices that once promised empowerment were now being studied as sources of dependency. Society was, at last, confronting the emotional price of the attention economy. Yet, for all the criticism, the networks themselves remained deeply embedded in modern life. They were how people communicated, organized, learned, and remembered. Even those who distrusted them could not entirely escape them. The world had built its social and economic infrastructure atop the digital grid, and dismantling it was no longer an option. The challenge was no longer whether to live online, but how to live online responsibly. As the backlash grew, innovation began to shift direction. A new generation of technologists and ethicists started designing systems with privacy and dignity in mind. Decentralized networks emerged, giving users more control over their data. Encryption became mainstream. The vocabulary of progress changed from growth and scale to trust and transparency. The same creativity that once built the attention machines was now being used to restrain them. But cultural change moves slower than code. Even as the world demanded reform, the machinery of engagement continued to operate beneath the surface. Fueled by the same invisible metrics, it was a reminder that the struggle was not just technological, it was human. The need for connection, validation, and visibility was still as powerful as ever. No regulation could rewrite human nature. The true awakening came not from any single event, but from a growing collective awareness. People began to understand that the digital world was not separate from the physical one. It was an extension of it. Every click had consequences. Every share carried weight. The internet was no longer an experiment. It was civilization's new nervous system. And like any powerful organ, it required balance, restraint, and care. By the early 2020s, a quiet equilibrium began to take shape. The platforms that once operated without question were now under constant scrutiny. Journalists tracked their influence, researchers audited their impact, and citizens demanded accountability. The relationship between humanity and technology had matured. It was no longer defined by fascination, but by negotiation. Still, beneath the reforms and debates, one truth remained. The digital genie could not be returned to the bottle. The networks had changed the way people thought, communicated, and remembered. They had altered the rhythm of politics, the nature of identity, and the pace of history itself. The backlash could slow the tide, but it could not reverse it in the end. The world's response to the age of data was not destruction, but adaptation. Out of the chaos of scandal and mistrust came a new kind of literacy, a deeper understanding of how power operates in the age of information. People learned to question what they saw, to guard what they shared, to value silence as much as connection. The digital revolution had entered its reflective phase. Humanity, for the first time, was looking into the mirror it had built and deciding what kind of reflection it wanted to see. The metaverse and the future. Can connection be redeemed? The digital world stands on the edge of another transformation. After 2 decades of living through screens, humanity is preparing to step inside them. The next frontier of connection is no longer limited to feeds or timelines. It is an entire environment, an immersive layer of existence where reality and simulation merge. Technologists call it the metaverse, but its promise is older than the word itself. The dream of presence without distance. At first, the vision appears familiar. People gathering in virtual spaces, working, playing, creating, sharing moments that transcend geography. It is connection reimagined, free from the boundaries of the physical world. Yet beneath the excitement lies a question shaped by the lessons of the past. Will this new dimension repeat the same patterns of control, distraction, and dependency, or can it become something different? The concept of a shared digital universe has been decades in the making. Early prototypes existed in games, chat rooms, and online worlds where imagination shaped reality. But now, advances in computing, graphics, and artificial intelligence have turned speculation into infrastructure. Headsets blur vision with simulation. Sensors translate movement into data. Currency takes digital form. What was once fiction is becoming environment. For some, this future represents liberation, the chance to rebuild identity and community without the constraints of time or body. In virtual classrooms, children from distant countries can learn together as if seated in the same room. Artists can sculpt with light. Architects can build without gravity. And memories can be recorded not as images but as experiences. In its most optimistic form, the metaverse is an evolution of storytelling, a canvas for shared imagination, but history has taught caution. Every new technology of connection has carried the shadow of commodity. If attention became the currency of the social media age, immersion may become the currency of the next. The data once gathered from clicks and posts will soon include gestures, tone, gaze, and heartbeat. The boundary between observation and existence may blur until surveillance feels indistinguishable from participation. Humanity must decide, again, how much of itself it is willing to trade for convenience. Across the world, thinkers and engineers are attempting to design a more ethical foundation for this coming space. They speak of decentralization, of systems that return control to individuals rather than corporations. They imagine digital identities owned, not borrowed. Communities governed by consensus rather than code. It is an ambitious vision, one that demands the maturity that the first generation of social media never achieved. Yet technology alone cannot redeem connection. The solution lies in intention. The same algorithms that once learned to exploit emotion could, with new purpose, learn to protect well-being. Artificial intelligence could be used to filter abuse instead of amplify outrage, to foster empathy instead of envy. Connection could become meaningful again if the systems that mediate it are built not to capture attention but to respect it. The metaverse at its core is neither salvation nor threat. It is a mirror, waiting to reflect the values of its creators. Whether it becomes a sanctuary or another arena of exploitation depends on the decisions being made, new in code, in policy, and in conscience. The future is still malleable, shaped not by inevitability, but by choice. As humanity steps into this new dimension, it carries the memory of the last. The era of social media revealed both the beauty and the fragility of connection. It showed how easily technology can magnify the best and the worst within us. The next chapter will test whether those lessons were learned, in the quiet hum of servers and the flicker of pixels. The story continues. Billions of people remain linked by invisible threads of information, still searching for meaning in the glow of their screens. Perhaps the true promise of connection has never been about technology at all, but about awareness, the recognition that behind every profile, every avatar, every digital voice, there is a human being reaching out to another. The future of connection will not be written in algorithms or architecture, but in empathy. The machines we build will only reflect what we choose to see in ourselves, and if we can learn to balance progress with responsibility, curiosity with humility, then maybe, just maybe, the next revolution will not break what came before, but heal it. Because in the end, the story of technology is the story of us. And redemption, like connection, begins with understanding.